Tim Canova is running. Are you ready, progressives? Against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Hello, clap, clap, applause machine in Florida District 23. That means that he's running against the machine. We know that this is a political revolutionary time, and it's on two levels. One has to do with the political revolution in the country, and another one, and you see this in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party, a revolution against a corporate-held, stultifying, and in his own way corrupt establishment within the parties. So for those of you who have, certainly for those of you who have endorsed Bernie, as I have, and as Tim Canova has, but for any of you who feel that the Democratic Party needs to be less tightly driven by a small group. You know, sometimes I feel like the Republicans have obviously more elitist policies, but almost a more egalitarian relationship with their own constituency. Democrats tend to have more egalitarian policies, but a very elitist relationship with their own constituency. And the likes of Deborah Wasserman Schultz, with all due respect, is exactly that. So I'm thrilled to see that Tim Canova is running. And as you'll hear in just a moment, you'll hear a lot of reasons why it's exciting that he's running. So Tim Canova, hi and welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I want all the progressives who are listening to know that you are an activist, you are an attorney, you are an educator, and you are a real expert on rigged economic and political systems, so much so that you have worked on various very high-level committees, including formed by Bernie Sanders, having to do with the likes of Joseph Stiglitz and Robert Reich and others who really know what they're talking about, Jeffrey Sachs, James Galbraith, and others who really know what they're talking about the corruption of Wall Street and its influence on the U.S. government. Would you say that that's correct?
Yes, you're referring to an advisory committee that Senator Sanders appointed me to in 2011, and it was a committee to advise him on how to reform the Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve, you're also a passionate opponent of the TPP.
Yes.
I think it's so important because progressives have this instinctive understanding that the economy is rigged, but we need those who understand that to be standing for that within the U.S. government. So we're very, very excited that you're running. Tell me something about the process that took you from someone who knows about economics, is an educator, who is an expert on these issues. What was the psychological process within you that actually took you from understanding those things and being an activist on those things to the point of actually running for Congress and having the chutzpah to take on Debbie Wasserman Schultz? Tell us about that.
Well, if I had spoken with you a year ago, I would not have seen this on my radar whatsoever. Last summer, I was active in lobbying Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office against the fast track for the TPP, for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was working with a bunch of grassroots folks from organized labor, the Citizens Trade Campaign, a lot of progressive Democrats. And I tried to contact her office. I've been teaching international trade law for many years. I was very critical of the North American Free Trade Agreement and the Free Trade Area of the Americas proposal of President Bush. And I had studied plenty on this and had some real views on the TPP and couldn't get anywhere with Wasserman Schultz's office, couldn't get any even emails returned. And we were sorely disappointed when she voted to fast-track the TPP. And that's when I started looking much more closely at her record. And the record is not a pretty one. She takes a tremendous amount of money from giant corporations, and she votes in the interests of giant corporations right down the line, very contrary to the interests of real human beings and her own constituents here in Florida's 23rd District. She has voted against Wall Street reform time and time again, most recently voting to prevent the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from writing rules dealing with payday loans and with racial discrimination in auto loans. Yeah, you would think we didn't even have a financial crisis in 2008 when you see votes like that. She has taken a tremendous amount of money from private prisons, alcohol and beverage political action committees. This was written about in The Intercept recently, and she's, not surprisingly, a big drug warrior. She opposed medical marijuana 2 years ago when it was on the ballot. It almost passed in Florida, just fell short, and she's been for privatized prisons. So these are real contrasts, real differences I have with her. My campaign is not taking a penny of corporate money, and we're representing working folks and real human beings. We want to end this drug war. We believe that state and local governments should make their own drug policies. It shouldn't be dictated by the federal government. We're for reforming Wall Street. We're against these trade giveaways that are really investment agreements for large multinational corporations. We'd like to see Social Security and Medicare protected. Debbie Wasserman Schultz hasn't even signed on to a bill that was introduced by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown and co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders, which would increase the funding for the Supplemental Security Income Program, which really takes care of the poorest elderly folks and disabled folks in this country. And she's turned her back on that. And then finally, there's the issue of climate change, which in South Florida is not some theoretical discussion. The projections are that within 20 or 30 years, big parts of South Florida are going to be underwater. This is people's livelihoods, and it's their homes that are at stake. And you take a look at something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that will make it that much harder to regulate carbon emissions. It will make it that much harder to try to not just stop climate change, but to deal with to mitigate the impact of climate change.
Now, every progressive needs to know, in case anybody doesn't, that Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she is the Democratic Party's head of the Congressional Campaign Committee. Is that correct?
Well, I believe she was with the Congressional Campaign Committee, and now she's the chair of the Democratic National Committee.
Right, and that's so important because she's really, I call it these days the Hillary protection machine, and very much responsible for the fact that there were have been so few Democratic debates, and the ones that have occurred on the presidential campaign trail have sort of been hidden. So I think that for those of us who've been lifelong Democrats, this is a very, very important issue. When I grew up, those who we saw the Democratic Party as a real vessel, as a real container for where you could pour your progressive values into the political system. And so that tension is so important. So I think someone like yourself running also in a seat which actually takes on someone who is such a linchpin in that is extremely important. How can people most help you, Tim? What do you need more than anything else?
We do need money, and we are raising money. In only 3 weeks, we've received more than 4,000 individual contributions, which is really unheard of for a congressional race. Many congressional races don't get that kind of support during an entire year, and we've gotten that in 3 weeks. And for all the money we've raised in 3 weeks from small contributions, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, in one day, just 2 days ago, had a $5,000 a plate fundraiser. She probably raised as much money in one day from a handful of wealthy CEOs than 4,000 Americans have been able to contribute to this campaign. And I want to stress that these are small contributions. I saw over the weekend an article that the average contribution for Senator Bernie Sanders was $27.
Right.
So I went on ActBlue to see what our average contribution was, and I kid you not, it was $27.27.
Right.
And I took that as a good omen.
Yeah, it is a good omen. And also I think progressives need to understand that you don't have to make a big contribution to be making a difference, because if enough people pay what they can, and if you're a real progressive and you really want things to change in that direction in this country, it should be worth $25 to you.
That's right.
You might not be able to make a lot of $25 donations, but that's why we're doing this summit, so that people can recognize how many congressional and senatorial candidates around the country are standing for these issues. What about getting money out of politics? How are we going to do it, Tim?
Well, if I'm elected, I think one of the first things that I'd like to do is to try to convene a bipartisan caucus in the House on Capitol Hill for campaign finance reform.
I am so grateful to you, because I've been asking this question to so many people who, when I ask, how are we going to get the money out of politics? They talk about overriding Citizens United, but hello, general concept there. Or people have to come together. Hello, general concept there. You are the first person who's actually said what you would do as a congressman to get this ball rolling. So I want you to say it again, exactly what you would do, because I love what you just said.
Thank you. We need a bipartisan caucus in Congress that is committed to taking money out of politics, overturning Citizens United for sure, campaign finance reform. We should have free airtime on television. You know, Walter Cronkite, the great anchorman for many years, before he passed away, he tried to champion this issue.
That's right.
You know, these are public airwaves. We shouldn't have to rent them back from large corporations.
Exactly. And also, Lawrence Lessig says if we have a constitutional amendment calling for public funding of federal campaigns, that by itself overrides Citizens United. Would you support that as a constitutional amendment?
100%. And I make this point time and again, that I think the United States is one of half a dozen democracies around the world that doesn't have publicly financed elections. And, you know, instead we have this system where the politician acts like a middleman or a middle person, you know, collecting money from large corporate interests just to pay large broadcasting interests for 30-second attack ads that really do not add to the public discussion of the issues in any significant way. They're quite the opposite.
How old are you?
I'm sorry?
How old are you?
I'm 55.
Because I want to see you more than win. I want to see you keep going. I think that you just are great. And
Well, thank you.
I like to see someone who is still young enough to have a long road ahead of you in this game. I want you
Well,
to win.
You know, I don't feel all that young, but, you know, I say Senator Sanders has inspired me to see a man 2 decades older than me to be putting it all out on the line. And I realized last summer when that fast-track vote happened, I have a lot of faith that Bernie Sanders could get elected. And I thought, if he gets elected, he's got to have a Congress that's going to work with him and pass a new deal, something different than what we've had. And it's not a Congress filled with people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So that animated me almost more than anything.
I'm so with you, and that animates me as well. That's why we're doing this summit, because progressives particularly need to understand that it's not enough to just focus on that hot and sexy presidential campaign. We have to be there with these congressional races. If there's a Democrat, hopefully Bernie, but some people watching this summit might not agree with that. That's fine. Whoever the Democrat is, they're going to need a Congress that supports these kind of ideas. And if it's a Republican president, we're really going to need people such as yourself in Congress to resist some of the changes that we know will be promoted by that president. So I just think you're fantastic, and I want everybody to know this one. Tim Canova. TimCanova.com. Make sure, everybody, that you really check out Tim's website, that you're very clear. This is a professor. This is a man who is an expert on economics. He knows not only that the system is rigged, but he knows how it's rigged. And that's a very, very big deal, because he can really get into the sinews and talk about this is what the corruption is, this is where it needs to change, because a lot of those devils are in the details. And this is a man who really knows how to get in there and stand for more than the values, stand for the actual substantial changes that need to occur. This is a man who actually talks about a caucus having to do with getting the money out of politics, not just vague generalities about how we all need to come together and override Citizens United. He has a plan for how we do it, how we make it happen. You've seen here on this summit already, this is a man who not only speaks with conviction, but speaks with great intelligence and information. You know, these kinds of candidates are not that common. This is a winner. This is a star. I know I myself am going to do everything I can to be of support. Tim Canova. Once again, remember, he's running in Florida's 23rd district. The primary date is August 30th. TimCanova.com. Please don't forget. Go to that website. Put it on your Facebook page. Put it on Twitter. Get the word out. Call anybody you know in Florida and do everything you can.